Have you ever seen someone change the entire atmosphere of a room without saying a word? They don't demand. They don't explain. They simply step back and suddenly everything shifts. Conversations dull. Energy tightens. People start looking around, wondering what changed. That's not coincidence. That's power. Not loud, attention-seeking power, but the kind that radiates from within, that disturbs the world by refusing to react to it. Now, imagine you held that same kind of power. Imagine what would happen if you stopped being emotionally available on demand. If you paused before reacting, withheld your instinct to explain, chose silence over self-betrayal. What would happen if you no longer played the role others assigned to you? Here's what would happen. The script would collapse. The illusion of control others have over you would fracture. Because most people are used to managing you through your reactions, through your predictability, your eagerness to respond, your fear of being misunderstood. But when you step back intentionally, consciously, you break the pattern. And suddenly they realize something uncomfortable. They never really knew you. They only knew who you became for them. Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." So ask yourself, who gets frustrated when you become unavailable? Who panics when you stop reacting? Who starts pushing your buttons just to provoke a spark? These responses don't reveal anything about you. They reveal everything about the way your presence has been used as a tool. You've spent so much of your life trying to keep people close that you never noticed how far from yourself you've wandered. You say yes when your spirit screams no. You reply instantly even when you're exhausted. You perform kindness as if it were a duty, not a choice. And what's left after all of that? Fatigue, resentment, a hollow kind of sadness you can't name. And here's the reason why. You are too available to those who haven't earned even a second of your silence. This is not about becoming indifferent to the world. This is not bitterness masked as empowerment. This is about reclaiming your center. This is about choosing you. Jung called this individuation, the slow, often painful process of becoming whole, of discovering who you truly are when you are no longer shaped by obligation. And that process begins with stillness, with learning that your silence can hold more power than 1,000 well-rehearsed explanations. When you no longer respond on command, when your presence becomes intentional instead of automatic, the people around you are forced to feel the absence they took for granted. They are forced to face their own dependency on your reaction. And that silence, it's not passive, it's a revolution, because it is the first time you are choosing yourself over their comfort. You were trained by culture, by upbringing, by fear to always be available, to answer the call, to sacrifice your energy at the first hint of disappointment. You were taught that love means saying yes, that worth means being wanted, that peace means avoiding conflict. But none of that is true. What you've been living is not peace. It's surrender dressed as politeness. It's exhaustion disguised as virtue. Excessive availability is not generosity. It's self-abandonment. You thought being there for everyone would mean someone would eventually be there for you. But that's not how it works. Because when you are always accessible, people stop seeing you as a person. You become an emotional vending machine, always on, always reliable, always drained. Carl Jung spoke of the persona, the mask we wear to be accepted, to be loved, to belong. You've been wearing that mask for so long you've mistaken it for your face. You smile when you're suffocating. You explain yourself to people who don't care. You defend your existence as though it's on trial every day. But here's the truth. The more space you give others on your stage, the more you vanish from your own. You don't just become invisible, you become replaceable. People will always take what is given too freely. They will confuse your kindness with obligation, your presence with permanence. And the moment you break character, when you stop responding, when you set a boundary, when you choose silence, they will accuse you of changing. But you haven't changed. You've just stopped being useful to their script. And that is the point at which your power begins. The harsh reality is this: people value what they earn, not what they're handed. What's always present becomes background noise. What's always available becomes emotionally expendable. It's not cruelty, it's psychology. So take a moment and ask yourself, who really deserves access to your energy? Who deserves your attention, your time, your inner space? And more importantly, who deserves your absence? But before you can answer that honestly, you have to ask an even deeper question. Why do you react so much in the first place? Why is your instinct always to fix, to respond, to explain, to be agreeable? The answer lives in what Jung described as psychic energy, your life force. Every emotion, every word, every act of attention takes something from you. You don't have an infinite supply. You've just never been taught to guard it. You spend energy every time you argue with someone who doesn't respect you. Every time you explain yourself to someone who's already decided how they'll see you. Every time you engage in conflict that offers no growth, only repetition. And worst of all, every time you pretend to be okay just to keep the peace. This isn't harmless, it's corrosive. Your attention is currency, and you've been handing it out like it's worthless. Jung said, what you resist persists. The more you react, the more you're tied to the drama. You think you're defending your dignity, but you're only reinforcing the dynamic. You're keeping alive patterns that should have died long ago, and slowly that psychic energy leaks, drip by drip, until you feel weak without knowing why. This isn't about weakness, it's about misdirection. People who are emotionally depleted aren't broken, they're misplaced. And misplaced people are easier to use, easier to manipulate, easier to drain. There are people, knowingly or not, who seek out that vulnerability. They see your open gates, your lack of boundaries, your emotional transparency, and they walk right in, not to connect, but to consume. And here's where the deeper damage happens. You begin to believe that their demands are your duty. That saying no is cruelty. That being silent is abandonment. That detachment is betrayal. You internalize guilt for protecting yourself. You start defending your right to breathe. But the truth is this: the people who love you only when you serve them never loved you, they loved the service. When you stop reacting, you become unpredictable. And unpredictability terrifies those who depended on your predictability. When you become a mystery, they can no longer script your role. They can no longer mold you into the version of you they prefer. And that's the beginning of your freedom. But it's not easy, because people will push, they will prod, they will call you cold, arrogant, selfish, not because you are those things, but because you stop being convenient. That discomfort, that tension in the silence, that's the sound of you reclaiming your energy. That's the weight of all the suppressed no's finally being spoken, even if only through absence. This is your turning point, your moment of pause, the sacred withdrawal, not as escape but as a declaration. I no longer owe my peace to anyone's approval. I no longer trade my silence for comfort. I no longer betray my truth just to keep a seat at a table that feeds on my energy. This is the moment you return to yourself. You think you're in control because you're conscious of your decisions. But are you truly choosing, or are you reacting? Most people aren't living, they're running on scripts written by fear, by guilt, by conditioning. And those who know how to read those scripts can manipulate without lifting a finger. They don't have to raise their voice. They don't have to demand anything. They just push the right emotional button and you react on cue. Carl Jung called it projection. When people offload what they cannot face within themselves onto others. But here's the part no one warns you about. The more emotionally accessible you are, the more you become the canvas for those projections. You stop being seen for who you are and start being used as a mirror. You know, the people who only come to you in chaos, the ones who praise you as long as you're serving a purpose, the relationships that revolve entirely around your emotional labor. It's not an accident. You've trained others unknowingly to depend on you for relief, for validation, for distraction. And the longer you keep showing up the same way, the more that dependency grows. Why do you allow it? Because you fear being rejected. Because deep down, you've confused love with usefulness. Because you were taught that being needed is the same as being valued. But here's the quiet tragedy. The manipulator doesn't need to trap you. They just need you to keep playing your part. Keep explaining yourself. Keep reacting. Keep being emotionally generous beyond your capacity. That's how control works, not through force but through guilt. And the only way to break it is to stop dancing to the music, say less, react less, walk away before the game begins. Withdraw not out of pettiness but to reclaim the narrative. Let silence do what your words never could. Because when you stop responding, the mask others placed on you starts to crack. The expectations they built fall apart. And the discomfort they feel, it's not about you. It's about the fact that they now have to face themselves without the distraction of your energy. Silence isn't absence, it's clarity. It's a mirror that shows people who they are when they can no longer define you. And that's terrifying for those who relied on your emotional chaos to feel secure. They'll say you've changed. They'll say you've become distant. But the truth is, you're just no longer playing a role that made them comfortable. Jung said, "We do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light but by making the darkness conscious." When you stop feeding dysfunctional cycles, when you stop offering your presence unconditionally, the shadows in others begin to surface. And many will fight you not because you've wronged them but because they can no longer hide from their reflection. But what about you? Are you ready to sit in that silence, to endure being misunderstood, maybe even resented for the sake of your own healing? Are you ready to face yourself without the constant feedback loop of others' expectations? Because in that silence, something sacred begins, a rebirth, a new relationship with yourself. You stop being an actor and become the author. You stop being reactive and become sovereign. And yes, there will be pain, grief for who you used to be, discomfort in the withdrawal, loneliness in the rupture. But that silence, it begins to speak. It clears away the fog. And in that space where performance once lived, clarity enters, peace enters. You finally begin to hear your own voice again, not the one shaped by survival, but the one born from truth. The modern world is addicted to noise. Everyone's shouting, defending, arguing, performing. But power isn't found in volume, it's found in restraint. True presence doesn't announce itself. It arrives quietly, like a storm on the horizon, calm, undeniable, felt long before it speaks. Jung believed that individuation, the journey of becoming your full self, required a phase of withdrawal, not avoidance but intentional solitude. A sacred space where your energy is no longer on auction, where you can hear the difference between your intuition and your insecurity. That space is where transformation begins. But be warned, the more you grow into your truth, the more others will feel displaced. Not because you're cruel, but because they can no longer locate themselves in your reflection. And this is the cost of becoming whole. Some relationships will not survive your healing. But what comes next is worth every loss. You'll speak less and mean more. You'll show up only where you feel called, not where you feel guilted. You'll stop explaining yourself because you'll understand that your silence says enough. And those who once depended on your constant availability will either rise to meet your new boundaries or fade, unable to recognize the version of you that no longer fits their needs. But here's the secret. Those who truly see you won't demand your availability. They will honor your sovereignty. They will not punish your silence, they will protect it. Because they understand that true connection isn't built on constant access but on mutual respect. That's what you're doing now. You're rebuilding your life not around obligation but around truth. And it begins with small acts, ignoring a message that drains you, not explaining yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you, saying not today without guilt, saying no without a reason, turning your phone off and resting not because you're unavailable but because you are finally present for yourself. You don't owe anyone a performance. You don't owe them your peace in exchange for their comfort. What you owe is to your own soul, to guard it, nourish it, protect it like the rare force that it is. Because once it's gone, there is no applause loud enough to bring it back. There will be discomfort, guilt, old programming whispering that you're being selfish. But discomfort isn't always a sign of wrongdoing. Sometimes it's proof that you've started healing, that you've stopped leaking energy in places where it only disappears. Watch who resists your growth. Notice who tries to pull you back the moment you stand taller. See who accuses you of becoming different when you finally become real. These aren't warnings, they're confirmations. You're on the path of wholeness now. Jung said that the self is not something found but something created, and you are in the process of creating yourself, not through their validation but through your own reflection. You will lose people, but you will regain your voice. You will feel alone, but you will meet your center. You will be misunderstood, but you will finally be whole. And eventually, you'll walk into a room and not need to be seen. You'll speak and not need to be agreed with. You'll be silent and still carry presence, because you've stopped being available for what drains you. And that's what makes you unshakable. This isn't the end of your story. It's the beginning of your return. The moment where you stop being reactive, where you stop being everyone's support system and start becoming your own foundation. When your energy becomes sacred, so does your time, your attention, your presence. And the people who remain, the ones who meet you without needing to pull from you, those are the ones worth keeping. So now you begin again, with clearer eyes, with stronger boundaries, with quieter power. And from this moment forward, may you never again apologize for the silence that saves your soul.